Welcome back to your nightmares, my children. This is Mr. Midnight speaking. I welcome you all to my humble abode. Today, I will be sharing with you some scary stories from when you are home alone. Being home alone sounds fun for all of you, right? But it's not always fun and games. Let's begin! But before we do, make sure you like and subscribe, because if you do not, I will devour you. So now buckle up, and always remember, the darkness always follows. I will now leave you with my narrator, so enjoy.
I was a kid home alone, and a fake Girl Scout cookie salesman wouldn't leave. Years ago, when I was 11, I was staying home alone with only my little brother who was 7. At that time, it was about 9 p.m, dark and pouring rain, and we were reading in our room, right next to the front door with a big window and open blinds. That's when I hear the front doorbell ring, followed by knocking. I thought my parents had arrived. Strange though that they didn't use the garage or their keys. I looked outside to see their car. Nothing but rain. As I approached the door, I hear a man's voice that was not my father's yell through the torrent. "Would you like some cookies? We're selling Girl Scout cookies." I'm shocked at this, considering the weather and time of day. Saying nothing, I checked the peephole and peered through the side window, only to see it was not a father with his girl as I expected. My heart dropped. Standing there was just a fully grown man, maybe in his late 50s. No box of cookies in sight, soaking on my doorstep. I can remember the gut-wrenching feeling of having to check the locks while he was right on the other side. For sure, he heard this. The 2 locks were the only things separating myself and brother from a potential monster. He continued to knock and mention his cookies, as I considered calling the cops. That's when I remembered the blinds were open in my room where my brother's was, with the lights on. As I turn the corner into the doorway, I see the man carefully peering into our window, possibly eyeing my brother, distracted in his book. My heart was pounding now, as I began to panic. In a move that took all of my willpower, I quickly turned off the lights and ran over to the window to close the blinds. In full view of the man, as fast as I could, I double-checked all the locks in the house, closed all the blinds, and told my brother to go hang out in one of the big closets in the interior of the house. No windows. I didn't tell him what was going on, so he wouldn't be frightened. And for some reason, I never did call the cops or my parents. I just waited in the hallway until he left. Still thinking about it gives me shivers that so many things could have gone wrong that night. My worst fear since is a stranger getting to the unlocked door before I do. Home alone, I let a man in to read our upstairs gas meter. I was 12 and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up and getting restless. There was a knock on the door. Thinking it was her, I ran to answer it without checking through the peephole. A man was standing there with a clipboard and said he needed to check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived, so just told him, yeah, sure, whatever you need to do. I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had on a green and purple shirt with bold stripes like the host of Blue Clues. He came in and immediately went up the stairs to where our bedrooms were and walked into the open door of my room, the typical girly girl room with pink and glitter. Thank God, my sister came down the stairs at almost the exact moment. She said, "Oh, is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" And I complained about how Daphne wasn't here and was going on about how unreliable she was when my sister cut me off. Wait, if Daphne isn't here, who is that? I said. "He's here to read the gas meter." Her face turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out, hand clamped over my protesting mouth. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had cell phones and obviously weren't going back in the house to call authorities on the landline phone. Then my ever resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking right by our house and she motioned him over. She called loudly into the house, "Oh Dad, it's good you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meters upstairs." And just like she'd hoped, this man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of the house. The man on the street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents came home. He was very sweet. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming and locking the doors and windows. As irate as my sister was that I let someone in the house, she begged me not to call the authorities because my parents left her in charge, and she worried she'd be in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat from carelessly allowing some guy in, so I was on the same page. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. Same MO. She was home alone and authorities found the door open and no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe it was the same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street. Turns out we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop. We just didn't recognize him. He was lifelong friends with the family after that. Our parents were mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad we were okay. Though they did review all the rules of caution and didn't leave us home alone for a while. They found the girl and say she'd been held for a few days and then burned alive. They never caught the man, but fear not. He was in what appeared to be his early 30s in the 1960s. So in any case, he has to be dead by now. I just thank God every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action. False meter reader, let's not meet. 2 men tried to break in while my friend and I were home alone. I was listening to one of the creepy narrators who narrates L&M stories, and one story reminded me of a really scary encounter I had when I was 13. My parents divorced when I was in the 8th grade, and after my dad moved out, my mum was very single and ready to mingle, so she often left me home alone. I would usually have someone stay the night on nights I knew my mum wasn't coming home, so I wasn't totally alone. So one night, my friend and I, who I'll call Jesse for the story, was staying in the night, and for some reason, we had the best internet connection in the garage. So we were in there just messing around on MySpace and such when we started hearing what sounded like two people talking. Jesse and I stopped talking and were trying to hear what the people were saying. We got up and stood by the garage door, but we still couldn't make it out, so we went inside and looked through the peephole on my front door. There were two men standing in my driveway by my garage looking around. I immediately freaked out because they weren't standing on the sidewalk or anything. They were standing by my garage, like they lived at my house. I stood there watching them for a minute before one of them started walking up to the door. I quickly, but very quietly, checked to make sure both locks were locked and then looked back out the peephole. The man was leaning over to the side railing on the porch, trying to look into my mum's bedroom window. I instantly signaled to Jesse to go get knives and be super silent. I looked back outside and the two men were back by the garage talking. Jesse asked what had happened and I just told her to go make sure the doors were locked while I kept watch. She came back quietly and we switched. She kept watch while I looked for the house phone. This was before it was the norm for young teens to have cell phones. All of a sudden she says, "They're leaving." My heart sank because something in my gut just told me they weren't. Without even thinking, I asked her, "Did you lock the side door in the garage?" And she said she didn't. I took off through the kitchen into the garage just as I heard our side gate open. I made it to the door and locked the deadbolt before I could get the doorknob locked. And as soon as I flipped the lock, the doorknob twisted. I thought I was going to puke. I grabbed the handle and locked it before running back inside and locking the garage door. I ran to the back door and at that point just started yelling, "Lock the windows!" My back door had these sheer curtains over them where you were still able to see inside and outside, and before I was able to make it to the locked door, I saw someone walk up the back porch. I jumped behind the couch and watched as he tried to open the back door before the second guy followed. Jessie came walking into the living room and I grabbed her and pulled her down behind the couch with me. We both just sat there in silence, terrified, watching these two guys trying to figure out how to get in. I started to cry and Jessie was just sitting there shaking. After what seemed like forever, they walked off the back porch and into the backyard. We heard them banging around before we saw them walk back by the porch and out the side gate. I ran to the front and looked through the peephole again and saw them walk across the street and get into a car. I told Jessie they were gone. We both burst into tears and just started hugging each other. We called her aunt and she came and picked us up and took us to her house where we stayed the night there. We never told anyone because we thought we would be in trouble for some reason. But after that, I didn't stay home alone for years. But even at 25, I still get scared when it's just my daughter and I home alone while my husband is at work, or the rare occasion when he goes out with friends. We're lucky it didn't end worse than it did, but I'm still scarred from it 12 years later. So men who try to break into my house and who knows what else, let's not meet. 2 a.m. home alone and a really weird experience. Hi, I am new to the subreddit, but I have quite a few stories to share. Be it my own experiences or my parents' experiences. Needless to say, here is the one of the most interesting ones of the lot. I was 14 at the time of this, so keep that in mind for context. I was sat on my bed in my house, on my own, as usual. My parents were going to be out for the night, and we lived in a peaceful area. So even the strictest parents would have let their son watch over the house. As I was on my laptop watching videos, I hear a knock from the door. Mind you, this was 2 a.m. and I was already paranoid from my previous experiences. There was no way I was going to answer that door, but my curiosity was piqued. Since my house has 2 floors, there was a window right above the door which I could pull these blinds up to a slit to see who was at the door. My porch light was on, so light wasn't too much of a problem. Even though my paranoia peaked, I had a look to see who was outside. When I looked, there was nobody at all. I was about to just place the blind down when I saw someone under the light at the end of the cul-de-sac close and almost jumped backwards. This person was in a conveniently suspicious looking hoodie and tracksuit, with no light showing his facial features. His arms were to his sides, and he was staring directly at me. It was weird. He didn't move at all. He just stood there, under the light. After what seemed like 10 minutes, he just turned around and walked into the darkness of the main street. I sighed and went back to watching videos. Perhaps he was just some weird guy who came from the train station near my house. I had no idea, but any justification was better than the alternative. Eventually, around 3 a.m., I fell asleep. I woke up about 4:40 to the sound of my dog silently growling behind me. I thought it was because he wanted to go out into the garden. So I turned around and froze in terror. The person from the street, he was in my doorway. No light hit him from the front, so even though I could only make out an outline of his face, we had another moment where I just stared into the void which was his face, only for him to break the silence with advice which seemed silly at first glance, but I have took it to heart since. Lock your back door. And as he did last time, he turned around towards the stairs, and with me still frozen in place, left my house through the back door. When I wasn't frozen stiff with fear, I sprinted downstairs and got to the back door. He was in the garden. I could only see his outline. He stayed still for a moment, only to sprint off into the woods. I never found out who he was. I didn't care to tell my parents what happened, and yet to this day, they still ask why I insist on keeping the back door locked. Honestly, I believe he was warning me. If he had been an unstable psychopath, I wouldn't be here right now. Considering some experiences I have had since, I say locking your doors, even in peaceful areas, is great advice. So 2 a.m. security checker, thank you. Even if your intention was bad, I still learned something from you. But even so, let's not meet.
Well, my children, I thank you all for listening. I hope this frightened you, because I know it did, because I can feel and taste your fear and sorrow. I'll see you again very soon. So until then, love the darkness as it always follows.